Begin by giving you a brief outline of the book of Numbers, chapter 1 and verse 1 through chapter 10 and verse 10. We have their preparations for their journey from Mount Sinai. Then chapter 10 and verse 11 through chapter 19 and verse 22, which is the end of that chapter, we have their failure to enter the promised land and the resulting 38 years wandering in the wilderness, taking place from 1011 to 1922. And then a final division, chapter 20 and verse 1 through 36 and verse 13, preparations for their second attempt to enter into the promised land. So we've got around 39 years taking place in all here in the book of Numbers. And we're going to be looking at the first 9 chapters this evening and this first great census that they take, along with several other of the necessary preparatory actions taken by Moses and Aaron and the princes over the 12 tribes of Israel before they go ahead and take this first journey for Mount Sinai. So chapter 1, verse 1 through 10 and verse 10 constitutes the first section of Numbers, where we have all of these preparatory actions taking place. You'll see in these chapters that God is quite concerned over detail. He's very detailed in these chapters, and he's quite concerned over making sure that they have things planned out in advance rather than just running into things headlong and headstrong. He has everything planned out in advance, gives them these plans, and then in verse 11 of chapter 10, they're going to finally begin to take their journey from Mount Sinai headed to the promised land on at least their first venture and their first attempt to make it into the land. And we're going to start in Numbers 1 and verse 5, skip over a few verses that we'll come back to, the first 4 verses, to look at these 12 tribes of Israel here. Notice from Numbers 1, 5 to 16, we've got the 12 tribes of Israel and important princes that are over these tribes. But these 12 tribes are different than the 12 tribes that we've seen earlier in the Pentateuch, and I want to see if you can find the differences. There's 2 major differences between the earlier 12 tribes and the latter 12 tribes. The 12 tribes of Numbers 1 are the same 12 tribes that remain consistently the same throughout the rest of the Older Testament. And these are the names of the men that shall stand with you. Speaking of these men standing with Moses and Aaron to number the people. Of the tribe of Reuben, Elizur, the son of Shedeur. Of Simeon, Shelumiel, the son of Zereshaddai. Of Judah, Nashon, the son of Amminadab. Of Issachar, Nethaneel, the son of Zuar. Of Zebulun, Eliab, the son of Helon. Of the children of Joseph. Of Ephraim, Elishama, the son of Ammihud. Of Manasseh, Gamaliel, the son of Pedazur. Of Benjamin, Abidin, the son of Gideoni. Of Dan, Ahiezer, the son of Ammishaddai. Of Asher, Pagiel, the son of Ochran. Of Gad, Eliasaph, the son of Duel. And of Naphtali, Ahira, the son of Enan. These were the renowned of the congregation, princes of the tribes of their fathers, and heads of thousands in Israel. Now, this heads of thousands is based upon the advice given back in Exodus chapter 18 by Moses' father-in-law, Reuel, or Jethro, whenever he said that he ought to divide the leadership up among men that would be set over 1,000, men set over 100, and men set over 50. So the highest rank of these men, according to Jethro in Exodus 18, would be those set over 1,000. And we see these 12 men here who came from these 12 several tribes of Israel, and these were princes set over 1,000. Now, what's different? In verses 5 to 16, as far as the 12 tribes go from what we've seen earlier in the Pentateuch. Ephraim and Manasseh are new. So that would give us 14 tribes, and if we add 2. Levi's gone, that would give us 13. Joseph's gone. That puts us back down to 12. So the verse is verse 10. Levi has been taken out of the 12 tribes we will see him appear again in chapters 3 and 4, because he's going to be separated wholly unto the Lord to minister on behalf of the whole nation of Israel. And then we've got Ephraim and Manasseh added in the place of Joseph and Levi. And this gets us back to our 12 tribes of Israel. And so looking at a map of the 12 tribes whenever they enter the Promised Land, which would be the same as far as the different tribes we see here in Numbers, we see them looking like this. We'll study this map more when we actually get to them being in the Promised Land. Simeon, Judah, Reuben, Benjamin, Dan, Ephraim, Gad. Here's the Manasseh separated across the Jordan River. Issachar, Zebulun, Asher, Naphtali. There you've got all the 12 tribes there. Notice there's no Levi there, no Levites, no tribe of Levi. And you also don't see the tribe of Joseph anywhere. That's because Joseph had been divided up between his firstborn son, Manasseh, and his secondborn son, who received the blessing, and that's Ephraim. That's what the 12 tribes look like at this time. They've changed since we first saw them back in Genesis. Now going back to the very beginning of the book. The Lord spake unto Moses in the wilderness of Sinai, in the tabernacle of the congregation, on the first day of the second month, in the second year after they were come out of the land of Egypt, saying, Take ye the sum of all the congregation of the children of Israel, after their families and by the house of their fathers, with the number of their names, every male by their polls, from 20 years old and upward, all that are able to go forth to war in Israel, thou and Aaron shall number them by thy armies, by their armies. And with you there shall be a man of every tribe, every one head of the house of his fathers. And these 12 men, head of every tribe, were the 12 that we just read. Picking up with verse 17, and so Moses and Aaron took these men, which were expressed by their names, and they assembled all the congregation together on the first day of the second month, and they declared their pedigrees after their fathers, by the house of their fathers, according to the number of the names, from 20 years old and upward, by their polls. As the Lord commanded Moses, so he numbered them in the wilderness of Sinai. And the children of Reuben, Israel's eldest son, well, we don't need to start into verse 20. That's going to start into the actual numbering. Going all the way down to verse 46, even all these that were numbered were 600,000 and 3,550. 603,550. An exact number here of these men, but it's interesting if you were going to go back to the book of Exodus to see that this number has appeared earlier in Exodus on another occasion. We first of all turn to Exodus chapter 30, beginning with verse 11. This is what all of Numbers 1 is about, the census taking. They end up with the 603,550. Exodus 30 and verse 11. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, When thou takest the sum of the children of Israel after their number, just what we were reading there, then shall they give every man a ransom for his soul unto the Lord when thou numberest them, that there be no plague among them when thou numberest them. Now this is speaking of the ransom money. I believe it was a half a shekel. But each one of these men above the age of 20, those that were able to go forth unto war and to battle on behalf of Israel, had to pay as a means of a ransom for their soul. And notice in verse 12 that they had to pay this ransom unto the Lord, which is a verse that you need to remember as far as the JDS heresy goes, which we used in the book on the JDS controversy, because what the JDS teachers are teaching is in effect something that a man named Gregory of Nyssa in the 4th century after Christ taught, known as the ransom theory of the atonement, part of which was true, most of which was wrong, in which God offered Jesus to the devil as a ransom for humanity. And you can read that in the book. If you're familiar with the book, you remember the statement in there. I got a quote in there of Gregory of Nyssa, how the Father offered Jesus, and Jesus, of course, complied in this by offering himself to the devil as a ransom for mankind, which in effect is what the JDS heir teaches. Whenever he went to hell and suffered at the hands of the adversary, he was in effect buying our salvation, purchasing it not from God, but from the devil. But the Old Testament clearly teaches that any ransom that was given on behalf of mankind had to be given to the Lord and not to the adversary. This they shall give every one that passeth among them that are numbered half a shekel after the shekel of the sanctuary. A shekel is 20 gerahs, and half shekel shall be the offering of the Lord. Every one that passeth among them that are numbered from 20 years old and above shall give an offering unto the Lord. The rich shall not give more, and the poor shall not give less than half a shekel, when they give an offering unto the Lord to make an atonement for your souls. And thou shalt take the atonement money of the children of Israel, and shalt appoint it for the service of the tabernacle of the congregation, that it may be a memorial unto the children of Israel before the Lord, to make an atonement for your souls. Now we see this fulfilled over in chapter 38 of the same book, beginning with verse 24, going down through verse 26. All the gold that was occupied for the work, and all the work of the holy place, even the gold of the offering, was 29 talents, and 730 shekels after the shekel of the sanctuary. And the silver of them that were numbered of the congregation was 100 talents, and 1,760 shekels after the shekel of the sanctuary. A beka for every man, that is, half a shekel after the shekel of the sanctuary, for every one that went to be numbered, and it's got went here in the past tense, so they've already been numbered by the time we get to Exodus 38. From 20 years old and upward for 603,550. You see, we end up with that same total figure as we see over in Numbers 1, I believe, in verse 46. So what is evidently taking place, what we have to assume has occurred whenever we're studying Numbers chapter 1, is that the numbering of the people has already taken place a long time before Numbers 1. It's taken place a long time before the first day of the second month in the second year, in other words. It's taken place at least 9 months earlier, way back earlier in the book of Exodus. And so all we have in Numbers chapter 1 is a formal declaration and a formal separation of the tribes for the purpose of the registrar among the Hebrews, to keep their registers straight, and of course now for military purposes. Prior to this, it was for spiritual purposes. Whenever they numbered them, they were to offer the offering unto the Lord of a half a shekel for the atonement of their souls, so that whenever they did go out into battle, the 603,550, that God would remember them on the behalf of the atonement that they had paid for themselves from their own offering. As he said, regardless of whether they were rich or poor, it was still the same offering. But Numbers 1 is for a different purpose. It's for the organization of the camp. It's for the marching of the tribes, which in essence is for a military purpose. So what we have here is the formal gathering together of the tribes, the military separation of the various tribes, and then the compilation of the figures, writing these on the Hebrew registrar. You'll see in another class how that there were many, many other, especially Old Testament books and various records and court chronicles and so forth that we don't have in our Bible, that the Hebrews obviously just kept among themselves. You have some mention of New Testament books over in the New Testament, like in the book of Colossians and the book of First and Second Corinthians, where you can determine that there are other books or other letters, we call them books, they were letters written, of course, that did not make it into our New Testament canon of Scripture, and the same thing is true with the Old Testament. As a matter of fact, many times when it speaks about, it'll give you a certain king over in Kings and Samuel, and then it'll say, and then the rest of his acts are written in the Chronicles of the kings of Israel and Judah. It's not our book of Chronicles, because you can turn over there and won't find it anywhere in there. That's another book of Chronicles, for the Chronicles for Israel and the Chronicles for Judah, and we have 2 books of Chronicles for our Bible. So they kept registrars and all types of things among themselves. David had court scribes and recorders and things like that stayed with him. Now I'm going to put up a chart of what they look like here in a moment, and you can get the different numbers for each one of the tribes from that chart. But the largest of the tribes was, of course, the tribe of Judah, with 74,600 men. And Judah maintains this ascendancy over the remaining 11 tribes throughout the Old Testament. And they start off here, 74,600 men, and that's followed by the tribe of Dan with 62,700. The smallest of the tribes was the little tribe of Manasseh. We see several hints of this that continue throughout Scripture, such as in the case of Gideon, over in Judges chapter 6, beginning with verse 14. Manasseh, by the way, had 32,200. So you can see they are quite small compared to a tribe like Judah, 74,600. Judges 6, in verse 14. The Lord looked upon him, Gideon, and said, Go in this thy might, and thou shalt save Israel. From the hand of the Midianites have not I sent thee? And he said unto him, O my Lord, wherewith shall I save Israel? Behold, my family is poor in Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's house. He's saying we're the poorest of all the tribes because we're the smallest. My family is the poorest family in the tribe of Manasseh, and I am the poorest member of my family that's in the poorest tribe, and that is the tribe of Manasseh. We see them continuing the same way. The reason they were given so much land is because they had so much cattle along with them. Because they're given land on both sides of the Jordan River, on the western side and on the eastern side. Now in verses 47 to 54, this is where we have our first commandment here to separate the Levites from the other tribes. Verses 47 through 54. So that's the census, taking up 54 verses. Chapter 2, we have the order of the tribes. That is the way in which they encamp, and we also have a hint of the way in which they're going to do their traveling. Show you a chart of the way they were encamped. You have to write quickly to get all of this down. I think you can see enough there. If not, then I can call some of these out. This is what he's setting forth now in all of chapter 2. I'll point those verses out when we get there. But this is to let you know how they actually encamped. Every time that the cloud stopped over the tabernacle, then they had to encamp in this particular position. Now the 4 leading tribes were Judah, Reuben, Ephraim, and Dan. You see they're located right in the middle. Then they had 2 subordinate tribes that came under each one of them. And we'll look at this when we get there. But it starts up here with Issachar. This is on the eastern side. Judah and Zebulun. It's more or less a rectangle from what we can tell. And of course the tabernacle is going to stay in the very middle to stay protected and also to symbolize the presence of God in the midst of his people. Not on the outside of his people, but on the midst of the people. Then the 3 southern tribes, Gad, Reuben, who's the leader, and Simeon. Notice the leading tribe that held up the standard that the other 2 tribes gathered around on each of the 4 directional sides of the tabernacle is not necessarily the most populous of the tribes, because Reuben here is not nearly as large as the population there in Simeon. The western side, Benjamin, then the leading tribe, Ephraim, and Manasseh. And on the north, the tribe of Asher, then the leading standard tribe of Dan, and Naphtali. That's the numbers on this side: 35,400, 40,500, 32,200. The numbers on this side: 54,400, 74,600, 57,400. I'll get to those in a minute. Go ahead and get them down. I didn't have room to put these numbers. This one should go under this number, just like this one's set up. The Kohathites, 8,600, 2,750. You should have the 3,200 underneath 6,200. Now these, we haven't gotten to the inside here. If you want to be copying that, that's okay. These tribes, Judah, Reuben, Ephraim, and Dan, had a standard. We're not told exactly what it is in Scripture, but it was some type of huge sign or banner. And the rabbis, the Jewish rabbis, by tradition, hold that on these various colored, 4 different colored standards or signs or banners, were 4 different faces, representing the 4 faces that were on Ezekiel's living creatures in the first chapter of the book of Ezekiel. And there you have a man, an eagle, a lion. What was the other one? I believe it was an ox. Those 4 faces there in Ezekiel 1, representing these 4 different tribes. And they had colors also, because see, if you've got several 100,000 people camping around you, they'd have to know where you're setting up. And you'd put the banner up, and it would have a particular color and a particular emblem or face or something on it. We're not told in Numbers 2 what it had on it. And all the other 2 tribes and the remaining part of your tribe would gather around that standard, and that's where you would encamp. Now, you'd have to stay separated. Simeon and Gad would have to stay separated, because this was supposed to form a rectangle around the inner circle here of the tabernacle. Just like Jesus had his 12 disciples, and then on the inner circle he had his 3 disciples, the Merarites, the Gershonites, the Kohathites. We have a threesome here that represents the inner circle of the camp of Israel too. First of all, we have the Kohathites. We'll come back to these numbers, what they represent: 8,600 and 2,750. Then the Gershonites, 7,500 and 2,630. The Merarites, 6,200, 3,200. And then on the eastern side, Moses and Aaron's sons. All on the eastern side. Right in the very middle, the tabernacle, and that's the tabernacle itself, in counting the outer court, and then of course you have the tabernacle proper right here at this end. I didn't draw all of that in, but you had to draw a picture of the tabernacle yourself before anyway. This is just the outside boundary of the tabernacle, and you'd have the holy place and the Holy of Holies right here. You need to remember this, because the critics are finding a big problem with this, as we'll point out here in a moment, according to chapter 2 and chapter 10. But this is the way they camped, and we're told this is the way they encamped. Numbers 2. The Lord spake unto Moses and unto Aaron, saying, Every man of the children of Israel shall pitch by his own standard with the ensign of their father's house. So we know it was some symbol they had on this banner or this flag that they waved for the people to see. Far off about the tabernacle of the congregation shall they pitch. Okay, verse 3, on the east side. You know the east side over here. Toward the rising of the sun shall they of the standard of the camp of Judah pitch throughout their armies And Nahshon, the son of Amminadab, shall be the captain of the children of Judah. Now, this Nahshon is a very important figure in the Old Testament, although we don't see him besides right here, because according to Matthew 1 and verse 4, he's the great-great-great-grandfather of King David, which makes him an ancestor of the Lord Jesus Christ. And he's from the tribe of Judah, and of course Jesus, David, Obed, and the rest of them are from the tribe of Judah, and this is who Nahshon is. It's, of course, misspelled over in Matthew. All these names, practically all of them are misspelled over there. So if you want to mark them out and write your correct Old Testament spelling in, that's fine. They call him Naasson in Matthew 1 and verse 4. Naasson. But it's Nahshon. The same fellow from Numbers 2 and verse 3, and from Numbers 1 and verse 7. In other words, he was the leading man. He was the prince of all the men in the tribe of Judah. And his host and those that were numbered of them were 70,14, 74,600. And those that do pitch next unto him, so we know he has to be in the middle. If both of these are next unto him, they have to be beside him. Shall be the tribe of Issachar. Nethaneel the son of Zuar shall be captain of the children of Issachar, and his host, and those that were numbered thereof were 54,400. Then the tribe of Zebulun, and so forth. Verse 9, all that were numbered in the camp of Judah, this would include Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun, were 100,000, and 80,000, and 6,000, and 400. Throughout their armies, these shall first set forth. Now that little particular phrase there in the end of verse 9 speaks of their marching order. How they're arranged right here is their encamping order. But when it says these shall set forth first, then that means this is their order for marching. And that means these three tribes right here, and I'll show you another picture of that in a moment, another chart of that, will lead the whole nation of Israel whenever they start out. Of course, there'll be a few in front of them, but they are the leading tribe as far as the other tribes go, the other 9 tribes in Israel. So you see, all that's divided up on the basis of the camp of Judah. Then verses 10 through 16 call the camp of Reuben. Verse 10 says on the south side. Verse 16, all that were numbered in the camp of Reuben. Then verse 18 through verse 24. Verse 18, on the west side. Verse 24, the camp of Ephraim. And Ephraim's the leader on the west side. Then verses 25 through 31. On the north side, the camp of Dan. Then the final 3 verses, 32, 33, and 34, have to do, again, just like chapter 1 ended with the same remark, that the Levites are not to be numbered along with the rest of them. They're fixing to be numbered here in chapter 3 and chapter 4, but they're numbered separately, apart from the 12 tribes. Now, in the end of verse 9, that phrase I just pointed out, these shall first set forward. The end of verse 16, and they shall set forth in the second rank. Verse 24, and they shall go forward in the third rank. And the end of verse 31, they shall go hindmost with their standards. So the end of each one of those verses, I'll repeat them, 9, 16, 24, and 31 already give us a hint here of their marching order. Now this is what the critics have a problem with. Notice that the last camp, of course, is this camp of Dan. For the most part, they're going to be marching in an easterly direction. They're always spoken of as going in an easterly direction, although they've got to go quite a bit north to get from Mount Sinai up to the Promised Land. It's still spoken of as going east, because from Mount Sinai, if you just drew a line straight over to where Palestine would draw straight down, you're going to be east. You're going to have to go a little bit east. So they speak of that as being east, and the eastern tribes are always the one who are going to lead. East is just an important distinction in the Bible. We see this especially over, of course, in Ezekiel's prophecy, that the east is the most important direction. Now it says these are going to go forth first, and then it calls Dan, in verse 31, they shall go hindmost. And over in chapter 10, and verse 25, and the standard of the camp of the children of Dan set forward, which was the rearward of all the camps throughout their host. Now, according to this diagram and looking at it, this would be the hindmost group right here, because that's as far behind as you can get. If this is the front, that makes the top, that's the bottom, that's the hindmost, as we read there in chapter 2, or the other word in chapter 10, this is the rearward. Not the reward, but the rearward. You have a forward, this would be the forward group, this would be the rearward group. But he's already told us in chapter 2 how they're going to set about. These tribes are going to go from the east to the south, to the west, to the north. You're going around in a circle like that. That is the way in which the people are going to march. They're not going to march, we could take either way. We could say east, then north, south, and then west. That would make them hindmost, or the rearward. Or to say east, then south, north. You've got to go in some order here. That would make them the hindmost or the rearward. But since the Bible calls them the hindmost or the rearward, it's obvious that he's counting around in a circle this way, counting around clockwise. Your eastern tribes, then your southern tribes, then your western tribes, and then your northern tribes. That's the way they're going to take off in their march. We see that, like I said, in Numbers 2 and 31 and 10 and 25. Now in chapters 3 and 4, we have the numbering of the Levites. We group these two chapters together. Some more statistics and facts that are a little bit difficult in these chapters on the Levites. These also are the generations of Aaron. The first 4 verses start off with the priests here. These also are the generations of Aaron and Moses in the day that the Lord spake with Moses in Mount Sinai. And these are the names of the sons of Aaron: Nadab the firstborn, and Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar, 4 sons. These are the names of the sons of Aaron, the priests, which were anointed, whom he consecrated to minister in the priest's office, back in Leviticus 8. And Nadab and Abihu died before the Lord when they offered strange fire before the Lord in the wilderness of Sinai, and they had no children. And Eleazar and Ithamar ministered in the priest's office in the sight of Aaron their father. So among this whole group here, you only have 3 priests. You've got Aaron, you've got Eleazar, you've got Ithamar. And those are the 3 priests. Those are the only 3 priests that they have at this time. One of those, namely Aaron, would fulfill the office of the high priest. And then he's got his 2 sons, Eleazar and Ithamar, underneath him to serve as subordinate priests who were over the 3 divisions of the families of the Levites, as we'll see in a moment. Now you'll remember all the way back in, I believe, Leviticus 10 is where we had the death of Nadab and Abihu. Nadab is the firstborn. Abihu was the secondborn of Aaron. And some people, I didn't comment on this when I was in Leviticus 10, some people think that's rather harsh of God concerning what he did in consuming them in Leviticus 10 for offering strange fire before the Lord. But if you'll turn back to Exodus 24, we perhaps have another hint here why they were held so guilty and responsible for what they did. Whenever we see Nadab and Abihu throughout the remainder of these writings, the writer always adds in that remark, and Nadab and Abihu died before the Lord. He always is reminding us that Nadab and Abihu died before the Lord whenever they offered strange fire. But do you remember who was with Moses and that group of men back in Exodus 24, whenever they all actually saw the similitude of God himself? Nadab and Abihu were there. Exodus 24:1. And he said unto Moses, Come up unto the Lord, thou, Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu. Not Eleazar and Ithamar. Nadab and Abihu. They were the firstborn and the secondborn. And 70 of the elders of Israel, and worshipped ye afar off. Verse 9. Then went up Moses and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel, and they saw the God of Israel. They actually saw him here. And there was under his feet, as it were, a paved work of a sapphire stone, and as it were the body of heaven in his clearness. And upon the nobles of the children of Israel he laid not his hand. Also, it repeats it for the second time, they saw God and did eat and drink. That's why they are without excuse over in Leviticus 10 whenever they're already offering a strange fire before the Lord, because he had condescended to personally manifest himself and reveal himself to these two priests, Nadab and Abihu. So they die, and this makes Eleazar second in line to Aaron, and Ithamar is put third in line. Eleazar is in charge of the Kohathites. You see their name here in the center of this chart. And Ithamar is in control or in charge. He is over the Gershonites and the Merarites. He's given two tribes, but the most important tribe, of course, or the most important family of Aaron's family, of Levi's families, is the family of Kohath. A lot of people don't realize that they're divided up like that. They just think of the Levites as being the Levites. But they're always clearly divided up. You're either a Gershonite, a Merarite, or a Kohathite. And the Kohathites, of course, had the privilege over the rest of them. Verse 5, And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Bring the tribe of Levi near, and present them before Aaron the priest, that they may minister unto him. They shall keep his charge in the charge of the whole congregation, before the tabernacle of the congregation, to do the service of the tabernacle. And they shall keep all the instruments of the tabernacle of the congregation, and the charge of the children of Israel, to do the service of the tabernacle. And thou shalt give the Levites unto Aaron and to his sons. They are wholly given unto him out of the children of Israel. And thou shalt appoint Aaron and his sons, and they shall wait on their priest's office, and the stranger that cometh nigh shall be put to death. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, And I, behold, I have taken the Levites from among the children of Israel, instead of all the firstborn that openeth the matrix among the children of Israel. Therefore the Levites shall be mine. Because all the firstborn are mine, from the day that I smote all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, I hallowed unto me all the firstborn in Israel, both man and beast. Mine shall they be. I am the Lord. Now the firstborn in Israel always had to be a male. So if the actual firstborn child was a female, then she was always disposed of, as far as she wasn't killed or anything, but disposed of as far as inheriting any type of blessing or first right anointing or anything like that. If you had 5 girls and the 6th born child was a male, then he was the firstborn, because it always went from the father down to the son. The only case where it ever went down to the daughters, and we'll see this also in the Pentateuch, is if you had only daughters and no sons, then in order to keep your name alive in Israel, in order to keep your property within your family, then certain rights were allowed to be passed down unto the daughters. The Lord spake unto Moses in the wilderness of Sinai, saying, Number the children of Levi. So here's their numbering. After the house of their fathers, by their families, every male from a month old and upward shalt thou number them. Now remember, the other ones were numbered from 20 years old. But that was for the purpose of warfare, not for the purpose of spiritual instruction. And Moses numbered them according to the word of the Lord as he was commanded. And these were the sons of Levi by their names. Levi had 3 sons, Gershon and Kohath and Merari. Verse 18, Gershon. Verse 19, the sons of Kohath. And verse 20, Merari. What he's given us, verse 18, verse 19, and verse 20, he's fixing to go into detailed account of each one of the families. So he gives us Gershon, verse 18, Kohath in verse 19, Merari in verse 20. Because then, beginning with verse 21, he's going to start specifying some things as far as the Gershonites are concerned. Do you have any questions up to here before I go on these various names? Okay, of Gershon was the family of the Libnites and the family of the Shemites. These are the families of the Gershonites. Those that were numbered of them, according to the number of all the males from a month old and upward, even those that were numbered of them, were 7,500. 7,500. That's what the first number is for. All the Levites of these three families from a month old and upward constitute these first numbers, or the larger numbers here. The families of the Gershonites shall pitch behind the tabernacle westward. That's why we have them over here on the west. They're behind the tabernacle westward. Down to verse 25, and the charge of the sons of Gershon in the tabernacle of the congregation shall be the tabernacle and the tent, the covering thereof, and the hanging for the door of the tabernacle of the congregation, the hangings of the court, and the curtain for the door of the court, which is by the tabernacle, and by the altar round about, and the cords of it for all the service thereof. Then beginning in verse 27, we have the Kohathites. Now, why do you think the Kohathites are given the importance over the other two families? Anyone know why? Got to speak up. Okay, but why did they get to do that? That's right, but they got to do that for the same reason I'm asking you, why were they important? Pardon? Write something in a book? Oh, no. That's not the reason they're important here. No. You give up. That's true, and that's important, but why were they allowed to do that? Who else do we have here who would come under the Kohathites? Go back up to verse 19 and read 19. Who's the Kohathites? Moses, Aaron. All of them are Kohathites. All the priests are Kohathites. Why? Because we know they come from Amram. Remember Amram back in Exodus 6, I believe? He was a past ancestor of Moses and Aaron and all that they produced. So that's why the Kohathites are important, because Moses and Aaron are so important. They happen to come from a division of the Kohathites known as the Amramites, but the Amramites were still Kohathites, though, because the Kohathite was the general threefold division, part of the threefold division. How many do we have here? Verse 28, 8,600. 8,600 males, month old and upwards. 8,600 Kohathites. Matter of fact, Numbers 3 is the best way to prove. Some of you had questions. How could we prove that Amram and Jochebed were not the direct parents of Moses and Aaron? Because it would read that way, it would seem that way, according to a strict or literal interpretation of places like Exodus 6. Well, this is the best passage to find out why we know that Amram and Jochebed could not have been their immediate parents. How come? Because of verse 28, if Moses and Aaron and Miriam, only three people, well, really back to verse 19, if Moses and Aaron and Miriam came from Amram, then you only have those three other sons mentioned in verse 19 who have come from Kohath, and that would mean that Moses and Aaron and Miriam would have, 8,597 cousins, living cousins. You can't, that's an impossibility. You following all that? You can't have that many living cousins at the same time. 8,597 living cousins. So we know Amram was way back there, even though it says Amram married Jochebed and she bore unto him Moses and Aaron and Miriam. Then we can go on down to verse 33. Starts the counting up of the Merarites. They're placed on the north, 6,200. Verse 38, but those that encamp before the tabernacle toward the east, even before the tabernacle of the congregation eastward, shall be Moses and Aaron and his sons. Here we go over on this side. Moses, Aaron, and his sons, keeping the charge of the sanctuary for the charge of the children of Israel, and the stranger that cometh nigh shall be put to death. Verse 39 now is a great problem in Numbers 3. All that were numbered of the Levites, which Moses and Aaron numbered at the commandment of the Lord throughout their families, all the males from a month old and upward, that is, counting the Merarites, the Gershonites, and the Kohathites, 22,000. Any of you add these up quickly here? The Kohathites, the Gershonites, the Merarites, the Bible says that totals up to 22,000. Couldn't, could it? You can already see it doesn't. It totals up to 22,300. The critics have a field day with that verse. One thing to remember, whenever the critics find something that is this obvious, the fellow that actually wrote Numbers, let's say it wasn't Moses, the fellow that actually wrote Numbers, he's not going to leave an error. If he's trying to deceive you into making you think Moses wrote this, he's not going to leave an error in there that is that easy to find. When he read back over it, he could spot himself. In other words, whenever you find something that appears to be this great of a mistake, it's always one of two things. It's either a copyist mistake, and it wasn't in the original, but it got in our translation, our version, or it was put there intentionally. And if it's put there intentionally and we're not given any other details, then we can assume that it's right, and these other 300 men evidently had already been dedicated unto the Lord for some specific previous purpose. Because obviously Moses could count that up and know it's not 22,000, it's 22,300. But that extra 300, all we can assume had evidently already been dedicated unto the Lord previously for some specific service. Now beginning with verse 40 and going on through the end of this chapter, we're spending some time here because this is setting the scene. God is taking care of all the minute details and particulars whenever they're going to actually take off from Mount Sinai heading to the Promised Land. And you need to know these ahead of time so you won't get confused on the Gershonites and Kohathites and Merarites as we see them later on.